Why was she even here? That was the question every pair of eyes seemed to ask when she stepped out of her car at the Riverside Range. A Honda Civic, paint dulled by years of sun, its engine ticking faintly as it cooled beside two olive-drab military trucks. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. On one side, men in uniform, moving with purpose, unloading heavy cases that gleamed with military-grade steel. On the other, a quiet woman in jeans, a navy blue sweater, and sneakers that had walked more grocery store aisles than gravel ranges. She kept her head down, but she felt the stares. Maya Johnson, 30 years old, though she looked younger to some, older to others depending on the light in her eyes. Today, those eyes carried something unreadable. Not nerves, exactly, not fear. Something more concealed. She carried no weapon. Only a small backpack with a water bottle and a folded piece of paper, her appointment confirmation to anyone else. She looked like someone with too much curiosity and not enough experience. Inside the main building, the air buzzed. The smell of gun oil and cordite already hung heavy. Soldiers spoke in clipped phrases, moving equipment like an orchestra tuning its instruments. Behind the desk, a sergeant with gruff eyes looked her up and down. "Help you, miss?" His voice was half courtesy, half suspicion. "I'd like to use the rifle range, please. I called yesterday about beginner instruction." The sergeant, Collins, his name patch read, didn't bother hiding the smirk. He'd seen this before. Civilians, weekend warriors, people looking for thrills, most left after realizing it wasn't like the movies. And this one? Polite voice, slender frame, soft expression. He couldn't imagine her handling a rifle larger than a .22. Beginner. Instruction, huh? Well, you picked an interesting day. Army's running training exercises might be loud for a beginner. That's fine, Maya said softly. Her voice had no tremor. I don't mind the noise. He shrugged, slid a clipboard toward her. Fill this out. Lane 12. Instructor Mitchell will be with you in 15. She thanked him. The words were quiet, almost too quiet for the storm of voices and metal clatter behind her. But she walked with certainty to lane 12. The far end of the massive hall rose. Of booths stretched across polished concrete, targets lined up like distant shadows, some 100 meters, some 5 times that. The further targets blurred into pale dots in the heat shimmer. Soldiers were already firing on their side of the range, crisp, calculated shots in complex drills. Their movements had a rhythm, a kind of dance where every step, every breath, every trigger squeeze was rehearsed and repeated until it was muscle memory. Maya noticed it in silence. She noticed everything. 15 minutes passed. She didn't fidget. She didn't watch the clock. She only stood quietly, hands clasped loosely before her, waiting, and then he came. Instructor Mitchell. Civilian clothes, rifle case in hand, weathered face, like leather stretched by decades of sun and smoke. You must be my 10 o'clock. Maya, she said. Thank you for fitting me in. He set the case down, snapped it open, revealing a Remington 700 standard training rifle. Not fancy, not cutting edge, but dependable. Most beginners start with handguns, he said casually. What made you pick a rifle? Her answer was simple. I wanted to challenge myself. Mitchell studied her face. No arrogance, no bravado, just quiet conviction. He nodded, handed her safety glasses and ear protection. Let's start with the basics then. Ever held one of these before? A few times, she said, brushing her hand across the rifle stock. Her touch was careful, familiar, as he explained stance, grip, breathing. The sound of coordinated gunfire thundered from the military section. Maya's eyes flicked toward the soldiers. Their precision was hard to ignore. Don't worry about them, Mitchell said, catching her gaze. They're showing off for their colonel. Focus here. She nodded, and for 20 minutes she listened. Not distracted, not restless, listening. Her questions were few, but precise. Too precise. Mitchell felt a flicker of suspicion. then pushed it aside. "All right," he said finally, stepping back. "Let's see what you can do. Target at 100 meters. Take your time, no pressure." Maya adjusted the rifle as though she'd done it before. Not rushed, not clumsy. The stock nestled into her shoulder like it belonged there. She lowered her head, lined up the scope, and adjusted the parallax with a tiny turn. One breath in, one breath out. She fired. The crack of the shot echoed, but she hardly flinched. Mitchell raised his binoculars, his lips parted, bullseye, dead center. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Beginner's luck." Her voice was calm. "Can we try further?" 200 meters. 3. Each time, the bullet found its mark with surgical accuracy. By the 5th shot, Mitchell's hands felt clammy on the binoculars. His heart ticked faster, though he couldn't explain why. He'd taught hundreds, maybe. Thousands. None of them learned this fast. A few soldiers began drifting over, curiosity pulling them like moths. She ignored them. She was locked in. Each shot was cleaner than the last. Mechanical, but alive. As though the rifle was an extension of her breath. At 500 meters, one soldier swore under his breath. "I've been shooting 8 years and can't do that consistently." Whispers spread. A crowd formed. Even the military exercises began to falter as eyes turned toward Lane 12. From the observation deck, Colonel Blake noticed the disruption. 15 years commanding elite units had trained his eyes to see what others missed. A cluster of soldiers, excitement humming. His aide leaned in. "Sir, unusual situation on the civilian side." "What kind of situation?" "A woman. She's out shooting everyone." Blake frowned, raised binoculars, Lane 12, jeans, blue sweater, civilian. Clear as day, except the shot. He caught it just in time. 600 meters. Wind curling across the field. She adjusted a hair's breadth. Fired. He tracked the round. Saw it land dead center. Not near. Not close enough. Dead center. His gut tightened. He'd seen this before. Not often. 3 times, maybe. All 3 belonged to people whose files were locked under clearance. Most officers didn't even know existed. He descended. Soldiers parted as he approached. Their chatter died. The weight of his presence filled the air. "Excuse me," he said. Voice even but firm. "Colonel Blake, 10th Mountain Division. Who's responsible for this shooting?" Mitchell straightened instinctively. "Sir, this is Maya Johnson, my student." Blake studied her, calm, unshaken by the colonel's presence, by the eyes on her. He'd seen seasoned men falter under less. "Miss Johnson," he said. "Impressive. Would you mind if I observed your next shot?" "I don't mind." The range went silent. Soldiers held their breath. She adjusted for 600 again. Wind drift, a whisper of movement in her scope. Then the shot. Blake raised binoculars. Saw the hole appear, dead center, perfect. He lowered the lenses. Heartbeat heavy in his ears. This wasn't luck. This wasn't talent. This was something else. Something trained and buried. He leaned toward his aide. "Get me a secure line, Intelligence Division now." Because he recognized it, Operation Nightfall, a program that didn't exist. A handful of ghosts trained. To be more precise than machines, a program disbanded, or so the files claimed. But here she was, at Lane 12, smiling faintly, as though this were just another Tuesday morning. And in that moment, Blake knew she wasn't who she said she was. And yet, she was exactly who she wanted the world to believe. What was she hiding? That question clung to Colonel Blake as he lowered his binoculars, his jaw tightening against the silence that had settled across the range. He had led men through ambush in the Hindu Kush, walked villages in the dead of night with only a heartbeat for warning. But this was different, because what he had just seen did not belong on a public range. It belonged to ghosts. Maya set the rifle down carefully, her fingers steady, her breathing even. She hadn't once looked at the crowd, not at Mitchell, not at the cluster of soldiers, not at Blake himself. Her focus remained on the weapon, checking the bolt, adjusting the scope, as if she were alone. Blake took a step closer. Every soldier's eyes followed him. The authority of a colonel was weight enough, but the curiosity pressing in around them was heavier. The mystery was thick in the air, and he could feel it pressing against the walls of the range. "Ma'am," Mitchell began nervously, as though trying to buffer the exchange. "The colonel just wanted to. I know what he wants," Maya said softly. The words were quiet. They shouldn't have carried, but somehow they did. The soldiers heard them, the weight of them, and Blake caught something else. The way she said it, like someone who'd lived her life anticipating questions far sharper than this. Blake studied her. Her posture was wrong for a beginner. Too efficient, too unshaken. He let the silence breathe before speaking. "The shot you just made, do you realize how few people on this base could do that?" "I wasn't counting," she replied, eyes still on the rifle. Mitchell's hand twitched. "Maya, I've been teaching 30 years. People don't just—" Blake raised his hand slightly, cutting him off. His eyes never left Maya. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" She met his gaze for the first time. Her eyes were sharp, alive with a focus that unsettled him more than the perfect shots had. "You think it's something I learned?" Blake's chest tightened. He recognized the deflection. He'd used it himself in interrogation rooms, in quiet debriefs, where truths were buried under layers of silence. He was looking at someone who had trained not only to fight, but to disappear behind him. One soldier whispered, "Sir, she's not normal." Blake ignored it. His mind was already spinning. Operation Nightfall. The program's name echoed in him like a bell he had never wanted to hear again. He thought of the files stamped with thick red ink, names erased, identities reassigned. He thought of the warnings. "If you see them again, don't look away. Report nothing. Let them fade." But he couldn't, not here. Not when one stood before him, rifle in hand, like a ghost dragged unwillingly back into the light. "Ma'am," Blake said, voice quiet now, meant only for her. "We should talk privately." Her lips curved in the faintest suggestion of something. Not a smile, not mockery, something sharper. "Why?" The colonel hesitated. "Because I know who you are. Because you're not Maya Johnson. Because you're a fracture of something that never should have existed." But the words never left his tongue. He could feel the eyes of his men on him, soldiers who trusted him to know, to understand, soldiers who didn't need ghosts whispered into their world. "Because talent like yours doesn't come from nowhere," he said instead. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she set the rifle down with deliberate calm, pushed the safety on, and stepped back from the bench. Her eyes flicked briefly to the crowd of uniforms, watching, waiting. She seemed to measure the risk in her mind before finally nodding. 10 minutes, she said softly. "That's all I'll give you." Blake motioned to Mitchell. "Clear this lane." The instructor hesitated, confused, but obeyed. Soldiers shuffled reluctantly, casting glances over their shoulders. The air buzzed with rumor even before they left. By the time Mitchell was gone, the far corner of the range was silent. Just the colonel and the woman in blue. Blake didn't waste time. He stepped closer, his voice low and controlled. "The pattern you shoot with, I've seen it exactly 3 times. All 3 belonged to units that don't officially exist. So I'll ask once, who trained you?" Maya's face remained unreadable. "No one. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." He exhaled slowly. She wasn't going to admit it. Not here. But her silence was its own admission. "You understand," Blake said, carefully, "that shooting like this makes people ask questions. The wrong people." Her eyes darkened, a flicker, just for a moment, of something he recognized. Exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that came from years of running, hiding, being told who you could never be. "What happens?" she asked, suddenly, her voice quiet. "If someone's cover is blown?" The question pierced him. He knew she wasn't asking hypothetically. He knew she already knew the answer. Relocation, new name, new life. An endless cycle of erasing yourself until nothing remained but the shadow. Depends who notices. He said after a pause. And how merciful they feel. Her eyes didn't waver. And you? The colonel felt the weight of command pressing on him. Duty, loyalty, security. The manual would tell him to call it in, to hand her over, to let the machinery of intelligence grind her down into another alias, another forgotten life. But manuals never carried the weight of real eyes looking back at you. Manuals didn't understand dignity. You've been gone a long time, he said instead. Haven't you? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He saw it in the lines around her eyes, in the silence that stretched between them. Blake made a choice then, one he knew he couldn't undo. As far as my report's concerned, he said slowly, you're a civilian, a talented beginner. That's all. Maya blinked, faint surprise flickering across her face. Why? Because some soldiers deserve to retire quietly. Something in her broke then? Not visibly, not dramatically, just a tiny shift in her shoulders. A soft release of air she hadn't realized she was holding. Relief. Fragile. Hidden relief. But Blake wasn't finished. He leaned closer, voice soft enough that only she could hear. You could help them. Not in combat, not in missions, but here, training, teaching them what the manuals don't cover. You could make them better without ever stepping back into the shadows you came from. Her gaze studied him, measured him. He wasn't lying. He wasn't fishing. He was offering, and it unsettled her more than any interrogation could. Hypothetically, she said, her voice barely audible, I might be interested. Blake allowed himself the faintest smile. I thought you might be. When they returned to the lane, Mitchell was waiting, surrounded by soldiers pretending not to eavesdrop. The colonel clapped his hands once. Gentlemen, Miss Johnson, has agreed to help with advanced training scenarios, purely voluntary. The soldiers exchanged confused glances. Maya only picked up the rifle again, checked the scope, and spoke with that same quiet calm. Colonel, would you like to see what this weapon can really do? Blake felt the corners of his mouth tighten. I thought you'd never ask. And when the rifle cracked again, echoing down the length of the range, even the most skeptical soldier realized this wasn't training anymore. It was revelation. Why were they listening so intently? Soldiers, men who had spent years in uniform, men who had fired thousands of rounds, now stood still like students before a teacher they didn't dare interrupt. And the teacher, a quiet civilian in jeans and a sweater, never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Every shot spoke louder than words. The crack of her rifle echoed once more, ringing across the vast hall. Soldiers leaned forward unconsciously, as if the bullet's path could carry them too. The target, at 600 meters, bloomed with another perfect hole, placed almost atop the last one. Private Wilson whispered, "That's impossible." It wasn't, not for her. Colonel Blake watched, arms crossed, his face unreadable, but inside, his thoughts churned. He had seen extraordinary marksmanship before. He had commanded men who could thread shots through windows at distances civilians couldn't imagine, but this wasn't just accuracy. It was something more, an ease, a rhythm, a poetry carved into steel and breath. Maya reloaded without fuss. Her movements had no wasted motion. She didn't preen under their stares. She didn't bask in awe. If anything, she looked faintly detached, as though none of this impressed her, as though none of this was new. She adjusted the scope again, her voice calm. "Colonel, moving target?" Blake glanced at Mitchell. The instructor swallowed hard. "We don't usually set it up," Blake ordered. Within minutes, a target rig began sliding across the far lane. Swaying slightly as it moved, the murmurs among the soldiers grew louder. Hitting a moving target at distance was notoriously difficult. Some of the best shooters on the base struggled with it. Maya crouched, adjusting her position. She didn't rush. She let the target move, let the rhythm of its sway settle into her breathing. Then, crack, the paper jerked violently dead center. The room erupted in low curses, laughter, disbelief. Some clapped hands on their helmets. Some shook their heads, but not one of them doubted now. Again, Maya said quietly. They reset the target. She fired. Another hit, then another. Staff. Sergeant Brooks blurted, "Ma'am, where in God's name did you learn to shoot like this?" She paused, wiped the rifle with a cloth, and spoke without looking up. "Practice. Lots of practice." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Blake caught the faintest shift in her face as she said it. A shadow, gone as quickly as it appeared. He knew then that she wasn't just showing them skill. She was weighing something. The risk of exposure against the burden of silence. As the day wore on, the demonstrations grew more advanced. She showed them subtle tricks. No manual covered, adjusting breathing patterns to stabilize aim under adrenaline. Compensating for the faintest shifts of wind, not with tools, but with instinct sharpened by repetition. She demonstrated shooting from awkward positions, lying sideways, crouched behind cover, standing at impossible angles. Each time, the bullet struck true, but it wasn't just what she did. It was how she taught to Private Wilson. Nervous and heavy-handed, she simply said, "Your heart is racing too fast. Time your squeeze between beats." He followed her advice, and for the first time in his career, his shot landed exactly where it was meant to. To Corporal Henderson, who gripped too tightly, she whispered, "You're strangling it. Trust the rifle. Don't fight it." He relaxed, and the difference was immediate. One by one, she unlocked them, like she could see through their skin. Into the small flaws that kept them from perfection, she adjusted each man, not with long lectures, but with quiet observations that cut to the core. "She knows what we're doing wrong before we even do it." Private Garcia murmured to his squadmate. It was true. By mid-afternoon, the soldiers were restless with energy. They had spent months grinding through repetition, years following standard doctrine, and here, in a few hours, one woman had shown them cracks in their ceiling they hadn't even realized existed. Blake felt it too. Excitement, yes, but also unease. He knew what it meant when secrets became too visible. He had seen men disappear for far less, and yet, watching his soldiers' faces, watching hope spark in them as they realized they could be better, he couldn't bring himself to silence her. Instead, he asked quietly during a break, "Why are you doing this? Really?" Maya looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes were tired but steady. "Because they'll need it." It wasn't an answer, not fully, but Blake didn't press as the sun began to dip. Mitchell glanced at his watch, shaking his head in disbelief. He had hardly spoken since the morning, relegated to an observer in what was supposed to be his class. "Colonel, I've never seen anything like this." "Never." Blake's voice was calm. "Neither have they." The final test came almost without warning. Blake wanted to see how far she would go. "Targets," he said, pointing across the field. 3 of them, different distances moving. The soldiers murmured. Even elite snipers often needed time to calculate between shots. Adjusting for bullet drop, wind drift, target speed. It required math. Instinct and calm, Maya didn't argue. She didn't even hesitate. She adjusted the rifle, glanced once through the scope, and then, crack, crack. 3 shots in under 15 seconds. Silence. Blake lifted binoculars, his breath caught. 3 dead centers perfect when he lowered the lenses. The soldiers were staring not just at her, but at him, waiting for explanation, waiting for meaning. Maya set the rifle down gently, like closing a book. Satisfied? Blake studied her. His men had just witnessed something they'd never forget. Something that shouldn't exist in their world. And she knew it. "Yes," he said finally. Though his voice carried a weight none of them could hear. Because he wasn't satisfied. He was worried. Terrified, even, not of her skill, but if what her presence meant, if she was here, if she had been found, or worse, if she had chosen to step into the open, then secrets were unraveling. But he saw something else too. The faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips as she handed the rifle back. For the first time that day, it wasn't a mask. It was real. Small, fragile, human, and in that moment, Colonel Blake understood. This wasn't just about marksmanship. This was about someone who had spent too long carrying silence, too long hiding from herself, and now standing on a range full of soldiers. She had allowed a sliver of truth to breathe. As the men packed up, Maya helped clean rifles, wipe down scopes, check bolts, not because she had to, but because it was routine, normal, grounding. To them, it was habit. To her, it was muscle memory of a life she could never admit existed. When the convoy of trucks finally pulled away into the fading light, Colonel Blake lingered. He watched Maya close her backpack, her movements unhurried, ordinary again. He felt his aide shift beside him. "Sir," Lieutenant Carter whispered, "what do I put in the report?" Blake didn't answer right away. His eyes followed Maya as she walked toward her Civic, blending back into the life of someone nobody noticed. Finally, he said, "Put down we encountered a civilian consultant, exceptional natural talent, nothing more." "Sir, that's the report, Lieutenant." He didn't look at Carter. He didn't look at his men. His eyes stayed on the small car disappearing down the road. Carrying a secret no one would ever admit aloud, because sometimes the strongest ghosts didn't haunt battlefields. They haunted the quiet spaces between lives. And tonight, as the range fell silent, Blake wondered if he had just met one of them. Why did she come back? That was the question that nagged Blake the following Tuesday morning as he stepped onto the concrete floor of Riverside Range. He hadn't summoned her. He hadn't asked. And yet, when the first rifles cracked at 10:00 hours, there she was. Lane 12. Same jeans, same quiet sweater, same eyes that noticed everything and gave nothing away. The soldiers noticed too, at first, in whispers, then in not-so-quiet jokes. "Think she'd do it again?" "No way. Last week was a fluke." But when she picked up the rifle and settled into position, every conversation stilled. Mitchell had learned his place now, not as instructor, but as facilitator. He set out rifles, checked safety measures, then stepped back, hands folded behind him. Even he seemed unwilling to interrupt whatever this was becoming. Blake stood behind the line, arms folded, watching. His stomach was tight. He had filed the report exactly as he'd promised. Civilian. Exceptional natural ability. Nothing more. Paperwork buried the truth. But paper wasn't what worried him. It was the people. Soldiers talk. Whispers spread. And if the wrong ears caught the wrong whisper, Maya Johnson's cover wouldn't last. Yet she was here. Again. Calm. Quiet. "Today," she said, voice soft but carrying in the silence, "you're going to shoot differently. Not harder. Not faster. Differently." The soldiers leaned forward, unconsciously attentive. Even Blake felt it. The pull in her tone, not commanding but assured. She set up a target at 300 meters, then stepped aside. "One at a time. Show me." Private Wilson went first. His shot rang, clipping just outside the bullseye. "Stop," Maya said, not harsh, just final. She crouched beside him. "You're flinching before you pull. You're waiting for the sound. Don't wait. Breathe." Through it. He tried again. Bullseye. His eyes widened. A grin broke across his face. He'd spent 3 years trying to fix that flinch, and she saw it in seconds. Then Henderson. Too much grip again. She corrected it, then Garcia, then Brooks. Each time, she caught the flaw before they even realized they'd made it. It was uncanny. Like she could see into the shot before the bullet left the barrel. By noon, the squad's morale buzzed. Men who had trudged through training months with only marginal gains were suddenly striking their targets cleaner, sharper, with precision. That startled even them, but Maya never smiled, not fully. The faint curve from last week was gone. She moved like someone carrying a burden. Each correction, each soft instruction seemed to cost her something. During the break, Blake approached her quietly. She was cleaning a rifle, methodical as always. Why come back? She didn't look at him, because they listened. That simple? Her eyes flicked up briefly. When you spend years teaching people who don't listen, you notice the ones who do. Blake caught the weight in her tone. It wasn't about rifles. It wasn't about targets. It was about something deeper. Maybe even regret. He wanted to ask, who didn't listen? Where? When? But he didn't. He sensed the door to that truth was locked, and pressing would only push her further away. Instead, he said, "You know what happens if anyone higher than me takes notice." "I know." Her voice was steady too. Steady, but sometimes you stop running, even if it's not safe. Blake studied her. Heart heavy. She wasn't reckless. He could see that. This wasn't arrogance. It was choice. A quiet choice to give something back, even if it cost her that afternoon. She demonstrated a technique none of them had seen. She blindfolded herself, sat cross-legged on the floor with the rifle balanced on her knee. The soldiers exchanged looks, some amused, some doubtful. Then she fired. The target at 200 meters snapped with a clean hole in the bullseye. Silence. "How?" Brooks stammered. She removed the blindfold. "You're too focused on your eyes. Shooting is not only sight. It's rhythm, breath, touch. If you lose your vision, you don't lose your skill. You only lose your panic." The room buzzed with whispers. For the rest of the day, the soldiers tried. Clumsy at first, then better. And when one of them finally landed a near-perfect shot blindfolded, they erupted in cheers. But Blake didn't cheer. He watched her quietly, unease growing. She wasn't just teaching skill. She was reshaping their understanding of it, giving them tools they shouldn't have had access to. Tools whispered only in places the government denied existed. As the sun dipped again, soldiers packed up, chattering with excitement. Mitchell approached Blake, shaking his head. "Colonel, I don't know what you've gotten us into, but these boys are different already. She's changed the way they think." Blake didn't answer. He was watching Maya wipe down a scope, her movements calm, detached. She looked lonely. That was the word. She was surrounded by men who admired her. Yet she carried herself like someone utterly alone. When the range emptied, Blake finally stepped beside her. "You know this can't last forever." Her hand stilled on the rifle. She didn't look up. Nothing ever does. There it was again. That quiet exhaustion, like a song played too many times. He wanted to ask more about her past, about the ghost she carried, but something in her silence stopped him. Instead, he said, "If you keep showing up, I won't stop you." Her eyes lifted, surprised. "Why?" Blake held her gaze. "Because dignity doesn't need permission. And because my men are learning more in 2 days than they have in 2 years. Her lips curved again, faint, almost invisible. But this time, Blake saw gratitude hidden there. As she left, driving her old Civic into the fading light, he felt the ache of conflict in his chest. He was a colonel sworn to duty, to protocol, to orders that would have demanded he report her existence. But he was also a man who had buried too many soldiers, who had watched too many young men fall because they hadn't been given the tools to survive. And in that tension, he realized something. Sometimes keeping a secret wasn't betrayal. Sometimes it was mercy. The next week, she returned again. And the week after that, each time, the soldiers greeted her with hushed anticipation, like children waiting for a story. And each time, she delivered more than they expected. She showed them night shooting with makeshift cover. She showed them how to listen for wind changes without instruments. She showed them how to wait. Not the still waiting of boredom, but the active waiting of patience that turned seconds into opportunity. And slowly she began to change too. Her posture softened. Her voice warmed, just slightly. She began to smile, faint but real, when a soldier landed a near-impossible shot. It was fragile, but it was there. Blake noticed it all, and it filled him with both relief and fear. Relief, because she seemed to be finding a sliver of peace in these Tuesdays. Fear, because peace never lasted long for people like her. One evening, as the trucks rolled out and the range fell silent, Carter approached him. "Sir, forgive me, but this isn't right. Who is she?" "Really?" Blake's jaw clenched. He thought of the report, of the silence he'd written into it, of the promise he'd made to himself. "She's exactly who she needs to be," he said finally. Carter frowned. "That doesn't answer my question." Blake's eyes followed the distant glow of Maya's Civic taillights fading into the horizon. "It's the only answer that matters." And with that, he turned and walked into the night, knowing each Tuesday was another step into dangerous grace. Why were the whispers spreading? That was the question that gnawed at Colonel Blake 2 weeks later as he sat in his office. Reports stacked high around him, untouched. The men had returned from another Tuesday session at the Riverside Range. Their voices alive with energy. They carried themselves differently now, sharper, more confident. But their excitement had consequences. Whispers carried, whispers always did. "Sir," Lieutenant Carter had said cautiously that morning. "There." Talking about her on base. Not loud, not official, just stories. Blake hadn't looked up from his desk. What kind of stories? That she sees things before they happen. That she can turn anyone into a marksman. That she shoots like no one they've ever seen. Blake rubbed his temple. Rumors. Soldiers need myths. But Carter had leaned forward, his voice lower. "Sir, myths attract attention. Sooner or later, someone outside this unit will hear." Blake hadn't answered. He knew Carter was right. Every secret had a half-life. Every ghost eventually left footprints. That Tuesday, Maya returned again. Jeans, sweater, Civic in the same parking spot. And the soldiers were waiting, eager, restless like children before a lesson. She didn't address the whispers. She didn't need to. She simply began. "Today, you'll fail first." The soldiers glanced at one another, confused. Maya set up the farthest targets, 800 meters, then 9, nearly 1,000. Wind gusted across the field. Swirling dust. "Shoot," she said simply. They tried, one by one. Each shot missed, some wildly. Even the best of them couldn't find the center. Frustration grew. Jaws clenched, shoulders tightened. Maya stood silently, watching. Then she stepped forward. "Now listen." She crouched, pressed her ear to the ground. The soldiers exchanged baffled looks. Then she spoke, almost whispering. "The wind's not steady. It rolls like a tide if you wait. If you breathe with it, there's a rhythm. Shoot against it, and you fight. Shoot with it, and it carries you." She picked up the rifle, adjusted. Calmly, fired. Crack, dead center, nearly 1,000 meters. The men fell silent. "Failure teaches nothing if you don't pay attention," she said softly. "Don't ignore it. Study it. It tells you how to win." For the rest of the session, they tried again. Slowly, painfully, they improved. And when Private Wilson finally landed a hit on the 900-meter target, the grin on his face said more than words could. But Blake wasn't watching Wilson. He was watching Maya. And he saw something different now. A flicker of fire. Teaching wasn't draining her anymore. It was feeding her. After the session, when the soldiers packed their gear, Brooks approached her awkwardly. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, why us?" She paused, wiped the rifle. "Because you'll remember." He frowned. "Remember what?" "That not everything in this world is written down." Her words hung in the air. Brooks didn't understand them. Not fully, but he felt the weight, and he nodded quietly. That night, Blake sat in his office long after dark, staring at a blank page. He should have filed something, an update, a warning. Instead, He poured a drink, leaned back, and let the silence stretch, because the truth was gnawing at him. If her secret slipped, it wouldn't just be her they'd take. It would be everything she'd given his men, and he couldn't allow that. But whispers are hard to kill. The following week, 2 unfamiliar officers appeared at the range. Not high-ranking, not obvious, just observers, they claimed, sent to monitor training. Blake's gut told him otherwise. He pulled Carter aside. Who signed off on this? Division HQ, sir. Routine oversight. Routine. Blake almost laughed. Nothing about Maya Johnson was routine when she arrived that morning. He caught her eye immediately. A flicker of understanding passed between them. She knew, of course. She knew. She had lived too long in shadows not to feel when eyes were watching. But she didn't falter. She didn't hide. She carried on, guiding the soldiers, ignoring the strangers who scribbled in notebooks from the corner. If anything, she pushed harder, showing techniques even Blake hadn't seen before. Firing through partial cover, compensating for heat shimmer at distance, even demonstrating range finding without instruments by listening to echoes. The soldiers ate it up, their loyalty deepening with each demonstration. They didn't just admire her now. They trusted her, fiercely. At one point, when the visiting officers whispered too loudly, Brooks muttered under his breath, "They can. Write all they want. She's ours." Blake caught it, and he knew then, if anyone tried to take her away, his men would resist. Quietly, maybe, but resist all the same. After the session, Blake intercepted the officers before they left. Well, they shrugged evasive. Civilian consultant, huh? Interesting methods. HQ will want a follow-up. Blake's jaw tightened. HQ doesn't get a follow-up. My unit, my training. They didn't argue, but their silence was worse. Silence meant reporting higher. Silence meant trouble. That night, Blake drove home heavy with dread. For the first time, he questioned whether his choice to protect her had put not only Maya at risk, but all of them. Meanwhile, Maya sat in her small apartment, the quiet pressing in on her. She placed the rifle case against the wall, untouched. She stared at the ceiling. She thought of the soldiers' faces, their eagerness, their loyalty, the spark in their eyes when they hit impossible shots. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something close to pride. But pride was dangerous. Pride drew light, and light revealed ghosts. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she almost wished she had never come back. Almost. The next Tuesday, she returned again. She always did. But now, the whispers had grown too loud to ignore. Why had he let it go this far? That question kept Colonel Blake awake on a night thick with silence. The lamp on his desk burning long past midnight. Reports piled in front of him, untouched. He had written none of them. Not the one about the observers who'd shown up 2 weeks ago. Not the one about the sudden improvements in his men's marksmanship. Not the one he should have filed about Maya Johnson, because to put her name on paper was to betray her. And yet, doing nothing was its own betrayal. The phone rang at 0100, a number he recognized. Intelligence Division. Colonel. A clipped voice said, "We've had chatter from your unit, a civilian consultant, exceptional accuracy. We'll be sending representatives." Blake's stomach turned with respect. My unit's training is internal business, not when it raises red flags. Click. Line dead. Blake sat in the silence, staring at the receiver. He had seen this play before. When whispers became chatter, chatter became surveillance, and surveillance became extraction. And once extraction happened, people like Maya never resurfaced. The next Tuesday, she came anyway. Same civic, same quiet sweater. Same stillness that seemed almost defiant now. Blake intercepted her before she entered. "You shouldn't be here." Her eyes lifted to his, calm as ever. Then, "Why are you?" He clenched his jaw. "Because I don't want them to take you." "They will," she said softly. "Eventually. They always do." Her certainty cut him. It wasn't fear in her voice. It was resignation, as though she had lived this cycle too many times already. Inside, the men were waiting. Their anticipation had shifted into something protective now. They stood taller when she entered, like bodyguards around an unspoken truth. That morning, she introduced something new, a drill none of them had seen. She scattered targets across uneven ground, at odd angles, behind partial cover. Then she spoke quietly. War doesn't wait for clean lines. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It breaks patterns. You have to break them too. They tried, fumbled, missed, cursed. She corrected them, patient but firm, moving among them like a shadow, her hands adjusting posture, her words slicing through bad habits. When Brooks missed a shot high, she murmured, "You're thinking." About the wind, don't think. Feel it. When Garcia rushed, she said, "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Don't chase speed. Let speed come to you." And when Wilson froze, rifle trembling, she crouched beside him. "What are you afraid of?" His throat bobbed. Failing. She held his gaze. Then fail and try again. He did. And the second shot landed perfect. By afternoon, the squad was hitting targets they hadn't dreamed of weeks ago. Their pride was real, but it wasn't arrogance. It was something quieter, resilience, and Maya saw it for the first time. She seemed almost lighter, as though giving away pieces of herself made her burden fractionally less. But Blake saw something else. Cracks, not in her skill, not in her teaching, but in her armor. The faintest softening around her eyes when one of them succeeded. The way her voice carried just a fraction warmer when they cheered. She wasn't only teaching. She was remembering what it felt like to belong. That terrified him more than anything. Because belonging made you vulnerable. At dusk, as the men packed up, 2 black SUVs rolled into the lot. No markings, no plates. Blake's blood ran cold. He stepped outside before they could enter. 2 men in suits, government issue calm, stepped out. One flashed credentials. "Colonel Blake, we're here to observe your consultant. She's not available." The man smiled thinly. "We weren't asking." Blake's hand twitched, a lifetime of discipline holding him steady. "This is my range, my unit. You want to interfere, you go through channels." The man's eyes narrowed. "You're protecting her." Blake didn't answer. He didn't. "Me too." His silence was answer enough. Inside, Maya stood at the window, watching. She saw this SUVs. She saw Blake's posture, rigid, unyielding, and she knew. The past was catching up. That night, as she drove home, her hands tightened on the wheel. She had promised herself she would never do this again. Never let herself be seen. Never let herself slip. But she had, and now the net was tightening. At home, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the plain walls, the modest furniture. A quiet life she had built brick by brick, Tuesday by Tuesday. And in that stillness, she'd let the memories flood. Missions whispered in corridors. Nights where silence was the only shield. Faces she had never spoken of. She had buried all of it, and yet, with each lesson, each soldier she lifted, pieces of it came back. She pressed her palms against her eyes. She had broken her own rules. And now Blake was paying the price. The next Tuesday, she almost didn't come. She sat in her car in the lot, engine idling, staring at the trucks lined up, soldiers unloading gear, laughing, waiting for her. She could have driven away. She almost did. But then she saw Wilson glance toward lane 12, scanning the lot, saw Brooks nudge him, muttering something that made them both grin faintly. They were waiting. They believed she would come, and that belief was heavier than fear. So she cut the engine, stepped out, and walked inside. Blake met her at the door. His face was tight, his eyes shadowed. "They'll be back," he warned. "I know. You could disappear again. You should." She shook her head. "I'm tired of disappearing." He searched her eyes. What he saw there wasn't recklessness. It wasn't bravado. It was quiet resolve. That day, She pushed the men harder than ever. She ran them through fatigue drills, making them shoot after sprinting laps until their lungs burned. She forced them to fire from mud, from awkward angles, from positions that stripped away comfort. They cursed her. They sweated through their uniforms, but they learned, they grew. At the end of the session, as they collapsed on the benches, Brooks muttered, "Ma'am, why are you doing this for us?" She paused, eyes sweeping across their faces. Young men, hardened by service, but still searching for edges to survive the wars waiting for them. "Because you'll carry it farther than I can," she said softly. And for once, she didn't hide the truth in her voice. That night, Blake sat alone in his office, staring at a message blinking on his secure line. Intelligence Division requests full cooperation. Civilian consultant must be transferred for debrief. He closed his eyes. He had known this was coming. He also knew one thing with absolute clarity. If they took her, they would never give her back. He poured himself a drink, his hands shaking. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure what kind of officer he was anymore, because protecting his men meant protecting her, and protecting her meant defying the very system he had sworn to serve. And in that impossible tension, Colonel Blake realized something chilling. Sooner or later, he would have to choose. Why hadn't they stopped talking about her? That was the question Blake asked himself as he walked the base corridors one late evening, passing clusters of soldiers whispering in low tones. They weren't careless. They never said her name. But he knew. He heard it in the reverence, in the awe, in the quiet way they spoke of her. By now, it was no longer rumor. It was myth. The woman who could see flaws in a man's shot before the trigger broke. The woman who could split a target blindfolded. The woman who made them better, not with volume, not with drills, but with silence. And Blake felt the noose tightening. Myths had a way of reaching ears they were never meant for. The next morning, his secure line rang again. He stared at it, dread heavy in his gut. When he answered, the voice was colder than before. "Colonel, we're done waiting. The civilian consultant must be transferred for formal evaluation. Orders are being drafted." Blake swallowed. His voice came out steady. "She's not military. You have no jurisdiction." The pause on the other end was telling then. "Colonel, jurisdiction is what we decide it is." Click. Blake sat in the silence, his hand gripping the receiver so tightly his knuckles ached. They were coming. He knew it. And when they came, it would be final. That Tuesday, Maya returned again. He half expected her not to. He had nearly called her himself to warn her, but some instinct told him she already knew. And when he saw her Civic pull into the lot, steady as ever, he understood. She had made her choice. Inside, the men greeted her with a kind of quiet respect that had deepened into loyalty. No salutes, no ceremony, just nods, subtle, protective. She wasn't their superior. But she was something more dangerous. She was theirs. Blake kept his distance. Watching, that day, she stripped shooting down to its essence. No tricks, no blindfolds, no theatrics. Just patience, breath, stillness. You think precision is about control. She told them. It's not. It's about surrender. You don't fight the rifle. You don't fight the shot. You let it happen. The bullet is already where it's meant to go. Your job is not to stop it. They listened, utterly silent. The crack of rifles echoed in rhythm, a strange, haunting cadence. By late afternoon, their accuracy had reached levels Blake had never thought possible. But even as he watched them grow, his chest ached with dread, because he knew this was the last time it could be simple. After the session, as the men packed gear, Maya lingered, cleaning rifles with her usual calm. Blake approached, his voice low. "They're coming for you." Her hand stilled briefly, then she resumed. "I know. You could run. Change your name again? Start over?" She shook her head. "And then what?" "Another town, another job, another Tuesday spent pretending not to exist." "I'm tired, Colonel. Tired of vanishing every time someone notices me. Blake's throat tightened. They won't stop, Maya. Once they've marked you, you're never free. Her eyes lifted to his. Then let them come. The quiet force in her voice unsettled him. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She had made peace with whatever was coming. That night, Blake sat in his office long after dark, wrestling with the impossible. His oath was to duty, to country, to chain of command. But his heart told him that protecting Maya was protecting his men, because she had given them more than skill. She had given them something the manuals could never teach: belief. When the knock came at his door, he wasn't surprised. Enter. It was Brooks, Wilson, Henderson, Garcia, 4 of his best. They stood stiffly, but there, eyes burned with quiet fire. "Sir," Brooks began, "we know they're coming for her." Blake said nothing. Wilson stepped forward. "We won't let them." Blake's jaw clenched. "That's not your decision." "No, sir," Henderson said softly. "But she's one of us now, and you know it." The silence was thick, heavy. Blake looked at them. Young men who had seen combat, who had bled for their flag, who would follow orders into fire. And yet, here they stood, willing to defy everything for a civilian woman they barely knew. He realized then that Maya hadn't just changed their aim. She had changed their loyalty, not away from him, but deeper, truer, rooted in something stronger than orders. He dismissed them, but their words stayed. The next morning, the SUVs returned. This time with more, 4 suits, credentials, authority that meant nothing and everything. Blake met them outside again, flanked by Carter. "Colonel," the lead agent said, voice clipped, "we're here for the consultant. You will release her into our custody." Inside, Maya was already on the range. The men had gathered around her, an unspoken circle. When the suits entered, rifles slung casually across shoulders tensed. No one raised a weapon, no one spoke. But the message was clear. Maya sat down, the rifle slowly, her eyes scanning the room. She saw the agents, she saw the soldiers, and she saw Blake, standing rigid. Caught between the two worlds, the lead agent stepped forward. "Miss Johnson, you'll come with us." The soldiers didn't move, but the weight of their presence was louder than words. Maya's gaze lingered on them. Wilson, Brooks, Garcia, Henderson. Faces young and scarred. Faces that had trusted her without question. Her chest tightened. She couldn't let them be dragged into this. She turned to Blake. For the first time since he'd met her, he saw something raw in her eyes. Fear. Not for herself, but for them. "Colonel," she said softly, "let me go." The words tore through him, because he knew what they meant. Let her go. And she would disappear again, vanish into a black file, erased, a ghost with no Tuesdays left. Refuse, and he would put his men at odds with the very system they served. The agents waited, the soldiers waited, Maya waited, and Colonel Blake stood. In the middle, heart pounding, realizing that no matter what he chose, nothing would ever be the same again. Why was the silence heavier than gunfire? That was the thought that gripped Blake as he stood in the center of Riverside Range. The standoff stretching into an eternity. On one side, 4 suits, cold and patient. Their authority resting not in weapons, but in the invisible machinery of government. On the other, his men, not defiant in posture, but unyielding in presence. Gathered around Maya with rifles slung loose but eyes burning with quiet refusal. And in the middle stood Maya herself. Steady, composed, her hands empty, her voice just used to ask him the one thing that shattered him. "Let me go." Blake's heart hammered. He had made hard calls before. Calls that cost lives, calls that saved them. But this wasn't strategy. This wasn't tactics. This was a question of what kind of man he was when the uniforms fell away. The lead agent spoke again. Voice clipped, clinical. "Colonel, this is not optional. She is classified. She does not belong here. Release her." Blake glanced at his men. Wilson's jaw was tight. Brooks's hands clenched on the strap of his rifle. Henderson's eyes locked on the agents with a protective fire that was almost dangerous. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Their silence was loyalty. Carved deep, Maya's eyes met his, calm, unafraid. But beneath that calm, he saw the truth. Not fear for herself, but for them. If she resisted, they would resist. If she fought, they would fight. And the fallout would destroy everything she had given them. Blake's breath came slow. The decision pressed against him like weight on his chest. Orders on one side, dignity on the other. Finally, he spoke. If she leaves with you, she disappears. We both know it. The agent's face didn't flinch. That's the point. Blake's gaze sharpened. She's not your asset anymore. She's my responsibility. The room seemed to shrink. Soldiers shifted, breath catching. Maya's lips parted slightly, the faintest sign of surprise. The agent stepped closer, his voice icy. Colonel, do you understand what you're saying? Blake's voice stayed even. Perfectly. The standoff stretched. Seconds bled into minutes. The suits weren't used to resistance. The soldiers weren't used to questioning. And Maya, she stood still, the calm in the storm, watching. The choice unfolded in silence. At last, the lead agent exhaled. He slipped his credentials back into his coat. Very well, Colonel, but this isn't over. He turned, motioned to his men. The suits walked out, boots echoing on the concrete, their silence a threat heavier than words. When the door shut, the room released its breath. The soldiers exchanged glances, unspoken relief in their eyes, but none of them cheered. They knew the battle wasn't won, only delayed. Maya looked at Blake. For the first time since she'd walked into his life, he saw something break in her composure, the faintest tremor in her hands as she clasped him before her. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. Blake shook his head. No. I should have done it sooner. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight she carried seemed to lift just slightly. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. That night, Blake drove home under a sky heavy with stars, his chest tight with what he had done. He had defied orders. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. But for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt in the endless machinery of command. Peace. The following Tuesday, she came again, and the Tuesday after that, no SUVs, no suits, just a hum of trucks, the chatter of soldiers, the quiet of a woman who taught them more than manuals ever could. But something had changed. The soldiers no longer treated her as a curiosity, or even just as a mentor. They treated her as one of their own. They carried her lessons into the field. They whispered her words. In moments of doubt, they leaned on what she had given them when nothing else held. And Maya herself changed too, slowly, quietly. The loneliness in her eyes dulled, replaced by something steadier. She never spoke of her past. She never admitted what Blake already knew, but she no longer looked like a ghost pretending to live. She looked like a woman who had found, if not a home, then at least a purpose. Blake kept her secret, always. Reports remained vague, bland, deliberately unimpressive. Just another civilian instructor, nothing worth notice. And whenever Carter asked, his voice edged with unease, Blake gave the same answer. She's exactly who she needs to be. Years later, soldiers from his unit would speak of those Tuesday sessions in hushed tones, long after deployment scattered them. Long after promotions and retirements, they would tell stories of the quiet woman who could split a bullseye blindfolded, who saw through their flaws before they did, who taught them not just to shoot but to believe. And though none of them ever knew her real name, none of them forgot her. For Maya, the Tuesdays became enough. Not redemption, not absolution, but enough. A rhythm she could live with, a place where she could give without losing herself entirely. She never stopped watching the horizon, never stopped knowing that one day someone might come again. But until that day, she belonged to the silence, to the rifles, to the men who carried her lessons into a world that would never know her name. One evening, as Blake walked her out to her Civic, the sun setting in bands of gold and red, he paused. "Do you regret it? Coming here?" She looked at him, eyes steady, the faintest smile curving her lips. "Regret is for things you can change." He nodded slowly. "And what about the things you can't?" Her gaze lingered on the horizon, on the sun dipping low. "Then you carry them, quietly, until they stop feeling heavy." They stood in silence then. Two soldiers from different wars, bound by secrets neither would ever put into words. And when she drove away, her taillights fading into dusk, Blake found himself whispering to the empty air. Some secrets are worth keeping, because in the end, dignity didn't shout. It didn't demand recognition. It didn't seek reward. Sometimes, dignity didn't speak at all. It simply acted.